Well, when it comes to diversity, the road to hell does sometimes seem to be paved with good intentions, helping advance the cause of one group is not always at the expense of some pampered, indulged, privileged caste of reprobates, but in fact means doing down another group whose disadvantage is of a different and perhaps less obvious kind. It's a story we've seen in education, where efforts to bring on girls and ethnic minorities has often been accompanied by a fall in the attainment of boys who are white and working class. And now evidence from a major new study that what we've seen in the classroom might now apply to the boardroom. About a quarter of boardroom directors come from a working class background. That's a judgment the report's authors base on things like whether a person was privately educated, went to university, and their parents' occupation. That's an underrepresentation because about half the population is working class by this study's definition. It concludes that men from poorer backgrounds may be being ditched from Britain's boardrooms to make room for an emerging generation of better educated, highly networked women. The Financial Report Council, whose research was conducted in conjunction with the London Business School, said, quote, "We have to ask the question whether we are replacing one underrepresented group with another." The report quoted one FTSE 350 chairman from a working-class background who described how, quote, "bloody hard it was when he did not have, quote, the correct accent." Another director complained about the dominance in boardrooms of the economist reading class, quote, "who go to Davos and pat each other on the back." Here's the presenter of Free Speech Nation, our own Andrew Doyle, who's alongside me. Before we get into this report, Andrew, what did you make of my last conversation with the good Reverend about religious toleration?
Well, my view with that is that if there's an advertisement to an event with an evangelical Christian and you find the content of that event to be offensive, don't go. Problem solved. That's my view on that. I just don't consider it a threat at all.
OK. If only all your answers were that direct and pithy.
I could go on and on if you prefer. We have a limited amount of time.
Stories to get through. Here we are talking about representation in boardrooms. Is it scarcely plausible that women are dislodging working-class men? Might that be happening?
Isn't it interesting? So I read through the details, and it's not clear why this is happening. It's just clear that the kind of women who are coming into the boardroom tend to be very well networked, well connected, privately educated from an affluent background, and the men who are falling away seem to be working class. I doubt it's targeted. I doubt it's deliberate. For whatever reason, that is happening. But what I think this is an interesting reminder of is that the contemporary left, the people who call themselves the left, they prioritise ideas to do with identity, race, gender, sexuality above all else. They are rarely concerned with class. They're rarely concerned with economic inequality, which is, of course, the traditional goal of the left, is to resolve those issues. And that seems to be completely absent in their entire thought. You know. And when you have these kind of tokenistic appointments, I mean, if you take, for instance, the BBC for the last few years now, every now and then there's an article comes out because someone is reminded that they regularly advertise for internships for non-whites only, and they do this because, of course, positive discrimination is against the Equality Act, but you can do it for internships and trainee posts. There was one back in June with The One Show, there was a trainee post, and white people were not eligible to apply. And they do this every now and then. And, of course, what ultimately happens in a lot of these cases is you end up with very privileged, affluent people from ethnic minority backgrounds filling the posts. So actually the people who really need a leg up don't get it.
And the flip side of that, I remember the hue and cry when John Humphreys, formerly of the Today programme on the BBC, who left school at 15, working-class area of Splot in Cardiff, worked his way up, model of social mobility, couldn't be bettered, and yet somehow he was seen as the wrong face, whereas someone like Michelle Hussein, yes, Asian, yes, very clever, very good at her job, the privately educated daughter of a consultant urologist. I mean,
yes.
You know, where's disadvantage and privilege in that equation?
We forget, don't we, that actually the key correlation with the key form of privilege is money. It's always going to be money. It's always going to be class. It's always going to be nepotism. You know, I mean, I used to work at various private schools. I didn't go to a private school myself, so the difference was quite stark. And at these private schools, I remember some of the pupils boasting about what they'd done over the summer, internships in the media, at theatres. There was even, I won't say the name of it, there was a magazine, very prominent magazine, and they were auctioning off an internship to that magazine for a charity event. So you not only, you know, it was an unpaid internship, so kids from working class backgrounds wouldn't be able to do it anyway, but now you had parents of rich kids buying the internship for them. So I think we have to get back to this idea that really money counts. I mean, think about it, 7% of this country are educated privately. They are underrepresented in all major forms of life. I've actually written just down a couple of stats on this because I think it's important, right? So 29% of MPs are privately educated, 57% of the House of Lords privately educated, 44% of newspaper columnists are privately educated, 66% of senior judges, 39% of the civil service. So in other words, 7% of the population are not... This doesn't match up, does it?
No.
And if you actually cared about diversity, if you actually cared about it, and I don't believe in quotas, right? I believe in meritocracy. I don't like the idea of giving people legs up because of accidents of birth. But if you really believed in diversity, you would institute a quota and say, well, OK, we're going to have 7% maximum of people in these roles from private schools. If you did that, you would also solve all sorts of other diversity issues because minorities tend to be overrepresented in the lower income bracket. No one's going to do that, are they? You know, when Shelter, the homeless charity, recently talked about, you know, they were caught because they were teaching their staff that all white people are privileged, you know, even homeless white people are privileged. And of course, all of their executives are white. Their CEO earns over $120,000. She's white. I don't see her saying, I'm going to step aside for an ethnic minority person. If they really cared about it, that's what they would be doing, wouldn't they?
Interesting thoughts all. The posturing. Let's talk about the posturing of companies who strike a woke pose, increasingly a widely observed aspect of corporate ethics. Businesses like Ben & Jerry's ice cream have long felt it necessary to assert their values as part of a progressive marketing strategy that's overtly political. They're at it again, this time saying the firm will no longer sell its product in the occupied Palestinian territories. As a protest against Israel's recent actions in the Middle East, it raises a number of questions, which I'm about to put to Andrew. How much truth, if any, is there in the jibe that companies who go woke go broke? Is there a difference between companies which are still family-owned and those who answer to anonymous shareholders? And when firms do take a position that might be described as political, should they secure a democratic mandate, just like the politicians? In other words, should they ask their staff to approve or disapprove, rather than leaving policies to a tight-knit, highly credentialed boss class? I bet you've forgotten those questions now, haven't you? Because
no, I can just about remember that. I mean, that's a really interesting point you mentioned at the end there, and it hadn't really occurred to me before, actually, this idea that if you work for a company and they are so vociferous in terms of their political values and you don't share them, I suppose your only option really is to shut up, isn't it? Unless you leave.
Walk.
Or you could leave, but I don't know, a lot of people aren't in that position where they can just give up their job like that. So that's a really interesting point. But the other question you asked is about going woke and going broke, and that is the adage, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if only...
I'm not sure it's true. Not remotely
If
true,
only
actually.
it were. Well, it is sometimes, and sometimes it isn't. So when there are Hollywood films that go particularly woke, I mean, they're all pretty woke, but when they really push it, they tend not to do very well at the box office, and that sort of pushes that idea. But then there's also, for instance, Gillette. Do you remember Gillette had their advert, which was all about the evils of toxic masculinity, and they lost about $8 billion as a result of that. And of course, you know, because they were effectively berating their core customer base and saying you're all evil, buy our razors. It's not a great tactic. So, but you know, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes, I mean, Ben & Jerry seem sort of unaffected, but they are a bit insufferable.
I don't know. I think they're quite affected.
Well, there's that. But, I mean they've done this again and again. So, do you remember they castigated Priti Patel about the migrant crisis? They've called to defund the police. They've called to dismantle white supremacy. There was a really interesting campaign in Australia during the gay marriage debate where they refused to sell 2 scoops of different flavours as a way to kind of punish people who opposed gay marriage. They even issued a new flavour called Pecan Resist during Donald Trump's presidency. You know, I just think, how about the capitalist class, with all their money and all their corruption, stop lecturing us.
Just pay your staff.
Just make ice cream and sell your ice cream and shut up.